It's a bright sunny day and a brand new year, and all of us are hoping and praying it's going to be a good one. Now, Audi India is one of the first car makers to launch a new car for 2021. It happens to be this, the new A4. And since you're here for my opinion, I think this is easily the best looking A4 of modern times. You see, the second edition of the A4 B8 or the first edition of the A4 B9, they're far too similar to look at when you compare them to each other. And then they were also very docile, had a very forgettable design. But the first generation of the A4 B8, now that was a looker, a very handsome car. It had that string of LEDs in the headlamps, and that brought modernity to the segment. The new one does something similar. You see this segmented brow of LEDs? I think it looks quite nice, fresh, unique. And I think it's something difficult to pull off with a corporate attire like this one. But it does it quite nicely. And in doing so, it maintains the elegance that we've come to expect of an Audi saloon, while adding hints of sportiness that we simply love about the RS cars from Audi. It still has the classic 3-box proportions of a business sedan, long wheelbase and a sharp silhouette that instantly tells you that this is still an A4. The twin tailpipes and the spoiler effect for the boot lid add the dash of sportiness, while the creases on the side, inspired by the new A6, and the complex tail lights that match the detailing of the front tell you that this is a modern-day Audi. The headlights are the multi-beam all-weather lights, which means they theoretically work well in rain and fog too, without the need of conventional fog lamps lower down in the bumper. There are modern touches to the cabin too. For starters, there is a larger screen which is now touchscreen. It also has the latest generation of the Audi multimedia interface, which with its styled layout makes operation easy when stationary as well as on the move. Speaking of using the functions on the move, all the functions, all the controls, all the switches, they fall easily at hand, which is a very good thing. Now, you don't get the twin screen layout that you get on some of the other premium cars from Audi. And I've said this in the past that I prefer this layout because I find this to be more intuitive. Another little thing that I like is the switches. Now, these are touch sensitive for the AC controls. The moment I even faintly touch either of the switches, it pops up this associated menu on the adjoining screen, and then you have to press the switch to cycle through the different options on that menu. But I really like how this works. The moment your finger even faintly touches it, you can see the change happening. It's a touch of class, and I quite like it. Because this is the range-topping technology trim, you also get the virtual cockpit digital instrumentation, which displays a wealth of info including sat-nav in a crisp and easy-to-read interface. Ironically, however, even in 2021 and even in the technology trim, you still get a USB-A port, not a USB-C. That said, there is a wireless charging pad that can take plus-size phones. Also, the reversing camera for this kind of screen feels far too low resolution, but the hardware for the infotainment is now up to 10 times faster than before. Those seated at the front will appreciate the typical prim and proper fit and finish of an Audi, while those at the rear will appreciate the generous contouring of the seats. The cabin isn't the most spacious, but seating is fairly comfortable even for long-distance journeys. I can tell you this because I've travelled across Germany and Austria in an A4 diesel. But I was also forced to choose the A4 wagon over the sedan for that trip because the boot space wasn't enough for my family's luggage. You don't get the A4 wagon in India, of course. You don't even get the A4 diesel. All you get is petrol, but the correct petrol engine this time around. It's a 2-litre 4-cylinder TFSI. More than the capacity, more than the power, the torque output, what you're really going to appreciate about this engine is how refined it is. Smooth through the rev range, and you have that faint, melodious 4-cylinder soundtrack when you stray past the 4,000 RPM mark, and it's quite enjoyable, in fact. Now, why I'm calling it the correct engine for the A4 is because compared to the 1.4 that it replaces, it feels a lot more enthusiastic when you are in an enthusiastic mood to drive. And it even feels more than adequate on the highway. It feels nice to drive in the city. In fact, on the highway, when you're maintaining about 2000 RPM, which is a relaxed engine speed, in top gear, you will get about 120 kilometers an hour cruising speed even with a full house. So that is good news. The only fly in the ointment for this powertrain, is the gearbox that it is mated to. It's a 7-speed DSG alright, but acts stubborn at times, showing reluctance to downshift when you expect it to, like pulling overtakes or negotiating a gap in traffic or dropping a gear for a corner. It's slow to respond to part throttle inputs, and though it's more than willing to drop multiple gears when you put your foot down, it takes a few moments before it processes your order. While it may not sound like a big deal, it does get frustrating on moderately trafficked highways. Around the winding roads, you're better off with the paddle shifters and reminding the gearbox who's the boss. But in a 50 lakh rupee sedan, you shouldn't have to, and the new A4's new age competition agrees. The other problem is the lack of quattro all-wheel drive. Of course, 190 PS may not sound like much on a car of this size. However, there is a fair bit of torque steer every now and then. It almost makes you feel like this could be a 300 PS car with a front-wheel drive configuration that needs you to be measured with the throttle every now and then. That's exactly the feeling it leaves you with. And unfortunately, that's not a very good feeling, especially in sport mode, because when you're driving in sport mode, the engine response is much sharper, the gearbox response is much sharper, and the gearbox is ready to downshift by up to 3 gears to give you that instantaneous power and torque to pull that overtake or to get a good power out of a corner or in his bend. And that's where the traction control just keeps kicking in every now and then. It's the same thing around the twisties as well. Go a little early on the power and the traction control lights up. Go a little heavy on your right foot on the throttle and the traction control lights up. Of course, you might argue that no one's really going to drive the A4 that enthusiastically. You're not going to find many people doing that to the A4. I understand, but the amount of times that the traction control kicks in, well, it just mars the driving fun, especially when you know that you have a chassis that is so good at handling bends and high-speed stuff. When you have an engine that is so eager as a beagle puppy, you want that quattro, you want the goodness of the quattro all-wheel drive and the agility that it brings with it. And unfortunately, that is missed so much on this particular package. The quattro would have just made it perfect. In our tests, the A4 went from 0 to 100 in 8.5 seconds, which isn't blisteringly quick and marginally slower than the larger Škoda Superb, which is propelled by the same engine. Speaking of the competition, of course, it's not as enthusiastic as the BMW 330i. So if you are a driving enthusiast all and out, that's the car you want. It's of course not as sharp as something like the Jaguar XE either. But at the same time, it's not as laid back as, say, something like the Volvo S60. Its powertrain is comparable to the Mercedes-Benz C-Class in its refinement, in the way it behaves, in the way the gearbox behaves. All of that is more comparable to the Mercedes-Benz. But I have said this in the past that of the three Germans, if you want the most comfortable ride, that is where you want the A4, and that doesn't change even with this car. In fact, right now, I'm driving over a very bad piece of road. Probably you're hearing it, the mic is probably picking it up, but I'm not feeling a thing. That's how good the suspension setup is, even for the Indian road conditions. One thing that we often complain with Audi cars is the lack of steering feedback. Of course, they have been improving with all the newer models that are coming out. The A4 is, of course, a slightly older model, but they have retuned the steering and I quite like what they've done with it. Of course, there are a few moments where it does feel a bit numb, but in terms of its responsiveness, there is nothing wrong with it, and I think I like how it's starting to weigh up when I start pushing the car harder around bends, especially here on these roads. That's the feeling it's left me with. So I think it has gotten a bit more chatty, a bit more communicative, and I like that. It weighs up nicely around the bends and complements the eagerness of the chassis and the powertrain. The A4 feels more supple and has better body control than even the Superb Sportline that we tested recently. Again highlighting that the only thing missing on the new A4 is the goodness of Audi's acclaimed all-wheel drive. If you're willing to ignore this lack of sharpness, and if treating the A4 like a sports sedan was never your intent, then this mid-size Audi ticks most boxes. Though new-age radar-guided safety and assistance systems have still not made the cut for the India spec model, the 2021 A4 has the tech and the features that matter to our market, and now it also looks remarkable than the German competition. a combination that was lacking in the outgoing A4 and one that can theoretically work in the new car's favor.